30,000 feet above the Atlantic, scalding coffee drips down 11-year-old Marcus Johnson's face as businessman Richard Whitmore smirks. "Accidents happen, boy," he sneers, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. No one moves, except Zara Washington, the senior flight attendant watching from the galley. Her hands steady as she approaches, face professionally neutral, despite witnessing what everyone pretends not to see. "Sir," she says with practiced calm that barely masks her rage, "I'll need you to come with me immediately." Neither realizes this moment will destroy careers, spark national outrage, and forever change airline policy. What invisible lines had been crossed that day? And who would pay the ultimate price for speaking truth to power? Before we begin this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up for justice, even when the world looks away, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more stories of courage in the face of discrimination. Marcus Johnson clutched his carry-on bag tightly as he and his mother Natasha navigated the crowded terminal at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The early morning sun barely filtered through the massive windows as they approached the Atlantic Airways check-in counter. Today marked a pivotal moment in 11-year-old Marcus's life. After months of regional competitions, his exceptional chess abilities had earned him a full scholarship to the National Youth Chess Championship in New York City. "Remember to thank Dr. Bennett when we arrive," Natasha reminded him, adjusting her professional blazer. As a single mother working as a civil rights attorney, she had sacrificed countless hours to support Marcus's talent, often taking him to chess club meetings between court appearances. "I will, Mom," Marcus replied, his eyes bright with anticipation. He'd stayed up late studying grandmaster techniques, determined to make his mark against competitors from prestigious private academies. Their excitement dampened when they reached the counter. The attendant frowned at her screen, tapping keys with increasing frustration. "That's strange," she muttered. "Your reservation shows you've been moved to standby status." Natasha's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. We confirmed our seats yesterday and received boarding passes via email." The attendant shrugged. "System shows your confirmed seats were released. It happens sometimes with our booking software." As they reluctantly moved to the standby area, Marcus noticed something troubling. Several passengers who arrived after them approached the same counter, received their boarding passes without issue, and proceeded to security. Every one of them was white. After 45 minutes of waiting, Natasha approached the gate agent, again phone in hand. "I have our confirmation email right here, sent yesterday at 7:42 p.m., seats 14A and 14B. The gate agent's smile tightened. "Ma'am, perhaps you misunderstood the email. Confirmations aren't guarantees. I've flown enough to know the difference between a confirmation and a standby notification," Natasha replied evenly, though Marcus recognized the subtle shift in her tone that signaled her lawyer mode was activating. A supervisor was called. More passengers boarded. Finally, after Natasha calmly but persistently presented their email confirmation and mentioned Atlantic Airways' own boarding policies, they were grudgingly permitted to board, among the very last passengers. Their relief was short-lived. "I'm sorry, but we've had to adjust seating to accommodate some last-minute changes," explained a flight attendant, directing Natasha toward the back of the plane. "Your son will be in premium economy, seat 8B, while you'll be in 32F. "That's unacceptable," Natasha protested. "He's 11 years old, and we booked our tickets together months ago specifically to sit together." The flight attendant glanced nervously at the growing line behind them. "I apologize for the inconvenience, but the flight is completely full. There's nothing we can do at this point without delaying departure." Natasha looked at Marcus, calculation visible in her eyes. He knew she was weighing whether this was a battle worth fighting or if causing a scene would only make things worse for them both. "It's okay, Mom," Marcus whispered, though his heart raced at the thought of sitting alone. "It's just a few hours." With visible reluctance, Natasha knelt to his level. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "Remember what we discussed. Head high, no trouble. If anything happens that makes you uncomfortable, press the call button immediately." Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding her unspoken message. As a young black boy traveling alone, he needed to be twice as careful, twice as polite, twice as invisible to avoid unwanted attention. As a flight attendant escorted him to his seat between two businessmen, Marcus glanced back to see his mother still watching him, her face a careful mask that couldn't quite hide her concern. Neither of them realized how prophetic her caution would prove to be. The boarding process was nearly complete when Richard Whitmore strode down the jetway, trailing the scent of expensive cologne. At 53, he carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to wielding power. His tailored, charcoal suit probably cost more than most passengers earned in a month, and his Italian leather briefcase swung casually at his side as he consulted his Rolex with an impatient frown. As senior vice president of Pinnacle Financial Group, Richard was used to priority treatment. Today's delay had been unavoidable, an emergency board call about their latest acquisition, but his irritation was palpable as he made his way down the aisle to his premium economy seat. Upon reaching row 8, Richard's expression shifted from mild annoyance to barely disguised displeasure. His eyes narrowed at Marcus, who sat quietly reading a dog-eared chess strategy book. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice carrying deliberately. He made a show of checking his boarding pass multiple times, turning it over and holding it up to the light. "I believe there's been some mistake. I reserved seat 8B. Marcus looked up, momentarily confused. "This is 8B, sir. That's what my boarding pass says too." Richard's mouth tightened as he signaled to a passing flight attendant. Not Zara, but a younger man named James who was clearly new to the job. "There appears to be a seating conflict," Richard announced. James turned to Marcus first, not Richard, and asked with barely concealed suspicion, "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" Marcus produced his pass, handling it carefully to avoid any accusation of damaging it. Richard exhaled loudly. "Well, someone clearly made an error. I specifically requested this row. I'm a Platinum Elite member." He emphasized the last 3 words while staring pointedly at Marcus's worn sneakers. After examining both boarding passes, James confirmed that Marcus was indeed assigned to 8B. Richard reluctantly took 8C, muttering just loud enough to be heard. "Must be some kind of affirmative action seating policy now." Marcus pretended not to hear, focusing intently on his book as Richard settled beside him, deliberately extending his elbow over their shared armrest. "Pardon me," Marcus said softly, trying to reclaim a sliver of space. "You'll have to make do," Richard replied curtly. "I have work to do." He proceeded to spread financial documents across his tray table, encroaching further into Marcus's space. Throughout takeoff, Richard made 4 separate phone calls, despite repeated announcements, to switch devices to airplane mode. Each conversation featured the same loud discussion of the 8-figure merger and restructuring the underperforming division. He glanced sideways at Marcus after each million-dollar figure, as if ensuring the boy understood how important his seatmate was. When the drink service began, Richard ordered a scotch despite the early hour, followed by another. The alcohol seemed to fuel his territorial expansion as he repeatedly adjusted his position, each movement pushing Marcus further against the window. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed determined to make you feel unwelcome in a space you had every right to occupy? Comment 1 if you've experienced or witnessed this type of intimidation tactics designed to make someone feel they don't belong. Like and subscribe if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with basic dignity regardless of age or race. What invisible boundaries do some people create to establish dominance over others? And how far will Richard go to assert his perceived superiority over an 11-year-old boy whose only offense was occupying a seat he felt entitled to? The tension is building, but this is only the beginning of a confrontation that will change many lives forever. Zara Washington moved efficiently through the aircraft cabin, her Atlantic Airways uniform crisp, despite this being her 4th consecutive red-eye shift. At 35, she carried herself with the poised professionalism that came from 12 years navigating not just turbulence in the air, but the often more challenging currents of workplace politics. Behind her practiced smile lay exhaustion and simmering frustration. Yesterday, after months of documentation and hesitation, she had finally filed a formal discrimination complaint with Human Resources. 3 times in the past 2 years, she had been passed over for the chief purser position, despite perfect evaluations and seniority over the white colleagues who received the promotions instead. "Zara, we need more ice in first class," called James, the newer flight attendant who, despite being on the job for only 6 months, already spoke with the casual authority of someone who expected compliance. "On it," she replied, maintaining her professional demeanor while mentally noting this was the 4th time today he'd directed her to handle tasks outside her assigned section. Small power plays happened so frequently, she sometimes wondered if she was imagining them, until she compared notes with other black flight attendants. During pre-flight preparations, Zara had noticed the seating arrangement that separated Marcus from his mother. She'd approached the lead flight attendant, Beverly, suggesting they find a solution before takeoff. "The manifest shows multiple opportunities to reseat them together," Zara had pointed out. "There's an empty pair in row 22. Beverly had dismissed her concerns with barely a glance at the seating chart. "We're already behind schedule. If they had an issue, they should have addressed it at the gate. We can't rearrange the entire cabin for every passenger preference." Zara knew better than to push further. After yesterday's HR complaint, she was already walking on eggshells. Instead, she made a mental note to check on the boy during service. As the flight progressed, Zara recognized in Marcus a familiar behavior pattern, the calculated stillness of a black child trying to be invisible to avoid trouble. She had perfected the same technique herself growing up in Baltimore, learning early that standing out often meant standing in the line of fire. She observed his careful movements, the way he minimized his presence beside the increasingly intrusive businessman, how he folded his chess book to occupy less space on the shared armrest. These weren't the natural actions of a carefree 11-year-old, but the practiced movements of someone who'd already learned hard lessons about navigating hostile environments. During the first beverage service, Zara paused at row 8. "What would you like to drink?" she asked Marcus with genuine warmth, making direct eye contact to acknowledge him as a valued passenger. "Just water, please," he answered softly, his eyes briefly lighting up at being addressed directly and respectfully. "And perhaps a cookie?" she added, slipping him an extra packet with a conspiratorial wink. "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus replied, a flash of gratitude crossing his face for this small kindness. Richard cleared his throat impatiently, clearly annoyed at not being served first. "I'll have another scotch, neat, and make it a double this time." Zara maintained her professional smile. "Sir, I'd be happy to bring you another beverage shortly, but we're currently serving this section by row." Richard's jaw tightened at this minor challenge to his priority status. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "A valued Atlantic Airways passenger, sir," Zara replied evenly, "whom I'll be delighted to serve as soon as I've attended to this row in sequence." As she proceeded with the service, Zara maintained her peripheral awareness of row 8. Richard's body language grew increasingly hostile, his movements more deliberate in their encroachment of Marcus's space. She'd seen this behavior before, the systematic testing of boundaries, the escalating provocations meant to elicit a reaction that could then be labeled as the real problem. When she passed their row again, she noticed Marcus had carefully arranged his few possessions to take up minimal space. His book now balanced precariously at the edge of his tray table, while Richard's documents spread across nearly 2/3 of both their spaces. The boy caught her watching and quickly averted his eyes, not wanting to be perceived as complaining. In that moment, Zara made a decision. While she couldn't change the seating arrangement, she would keep closer watch over this situation. After yesterday's complaint, she was already risking her career by drawing attention to potential conflicts. But some things mattered more than job security and the determined dignity of the child trying so hard to remain unmolested in his rightful space stirred something protective in her that transcended professional caution. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into the drowsy rhythm of transcontinental travel. Most passengers dozed or watched movies, the hum of the engines providing a steady white noise backdrop. In row 8, however, the tension continued to escalate. Richard repeatedly jammed his finger against his laptop keyboard, each aggressive tap punctuated by an increasingly frustrated sigh. The Wi-Fi connection, spotty at best, had apparently failed him at a critical moment. "Useless," he muttered, glaring sideways at Marcus as if the boy were somehow responsible for the technological limitations of in-flight internet. "Completely useless, can't get anything done in these conditions." Marcus had abandoned his chess book and was now attempting to complete a math worksheet. His teacher had provided extra exercises to keep him sharp during the days he'd miss for the tournament. He'd shifted his body as far toward the window as physically possible, making himself small. "You're taking up too much space," Richard said suddenly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I can't even use my laptop properly, with you constantly fidgeting." Marcus froze, pencil mid-equation. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll try to stay still." The meal service began, flight attendants efficiently distributing trays throughout the cabin. When Zara reached their row, she placed Marcus's tray down first, giving him an encouraging smile. "Careful with that," Richard said, as she set his tray in front of him. "I have important documents here." "Of course, sir," Zara replied professionally, noting how Richard had deliberately left his papers spread across his tray table, despite seeing the approaching meal service. As Zara moved to the next row, Richard shifted suddenly, his elbow knocking against Marcus's tray and sending a cup of orange juice splashing across the math worksheet and onto the boy's book. "Oh!" Marcus exclaimed, quickly lifting his papers, to prevent further damage. "You should be more careful with your drink," Richard admonished, loud enough for others to hear, completely inverting the reality of what had just occurred. I didn't," Marcus began, then fell silent, recognizing the futility of challenging the adult's version of events. "Here," Richard said with exaggerated magnanimity, offering a single cocktail napkin for the spreading puddle. "Accidents happen." Marcus accepted the insufficient napkin with a quiet, "Thank you, sir," and did his best to blot the soggy worksheet. Several nearby passengers had witnessed the deliberate accident, but quickly averted their eyes, unwilling to involve themselves. 15 minutes later, Zara returned with the coffee service. She noticed Marcus's damp papers in the stained tray table. "Would you like some extra napkins?" she offered, already pulling several from her apron. "That would be great, thank you," Marcus replied softly. "And for you, sir?" Zara turned to Richard. "Coffee. Black. No sugar," he answered curtly, barely looking up from his phone. Zara poured the steaming coffee carefully and placed it on his tray. "Please be careful. It's very hot." She had just turned to serve the next row when a commotion erupted behind her. A sharp gasp of pain cut through the cabin noise. Zara spun around to see Marcus half-standing, coffee streaming down his face and chest. The scalding liquid had splashed across his cheek, neck, and arm, the dark stain spreading rapidly across his light blue shirt. His eyes were wide with shock and pain, though remarkably he made almost no sound beyond that initial involuntary gasp. Richard sat with the now empty coffee cup tilted in his hand, his expression a calculated blend of surprise and indignation. "The boy bumped me," he announced loudly before anyone could speak. "He jumped up suddenly and knocked right into my arm. These kids nowadays, completely undisciplined." The lie was so blatant, so completely contrary to what had just happened, that for a moment the entire section seemed frozen in collective disbelief. Marcus remained standing, coffee dripping from his chin, his breathing shallow as he fought against showing the full extent of his pain. Several passengers had witnessed the truth, how Richard had deliberately tilted his cup as Marcus reached for his fallen pencil, how he had actually lifted the cup to ensure maximum spillage. Yet no one spoke up. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others pretended sudden interest in their screens or magazines. Only Zara, who had caught the entire sequence in her peripheral vision, moved decisively. She rushed to Marcus with a wad of napkins and a bottle of cold water. "Let me help you," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes reflecting a controlled fury. She gently pressed the cold water bottle against the boy's cheek, where an angry red mark was already forming. "It was an accident," Marcus whispered to her, his eyes pleading, clearly trying to diffuse the situation rather than escalate it. Even in his pain, he was attempting to create peace, to be the bigger person despite being the youngest one present. Zara made brief eye contact with him, a silent communication passing between them. In that moment, Marcus saw something in her expression that he desperately needed: recognition. She had seen. She knew. He wasn't crazy or oversensitive or imagining the deliberate cruelty. Someone in authority had witnessed the truth. "Let's get you to the lavatory to clean up properly," Zara said, helping Marcus to his feet. "Those burns need immediate attention." As she guided him toward the front lavatory, Zara glanced back at Richard, who was now smugly rearranging his documents as if nothing significant had occurred. He had claimed the entire row in Marcus's absence, spreading his belongings across both seats. What had begun as boundary testing had escalated to physical harm, and the cabin's collective silence had emboldened him. But Richard had miscalculated in one critical aspect. He hadn't recognized that in Zara Washington, he had encountered someone who had spent a lifetime documenting injustice and who was, quite frankly, out of patience. In the cramped aircraft lavatory, Zara gently cleaned the coffee from Marcus's face and neck. The boy winced as she applied a cold compress to the angry red patches forming on his skin. "These are first-degree burns," she said quietly, her professional assessment tinged with controlled anger. "Possibly second degree on your neck. We should document this." Marcus looked alarmed. "Please don't make it worse. I'm okay, really." Zara met his eyes in the mirror. "Marcus, what happened wasn't your fault, and it wasn't an accident. You know that, right?" The boy looked down, his shoulders tensing. "My mom says sometimes it's safer to let things go." "Your mom sounds very wise," Zara replied, carefully removing her phone from her pocket. "And sometimes that's true. But other times letting things go only ensures they'll happen again, to someone else who might not be as strong as you." She held up her phone. "I need to take pictures of these burns. It's standard procedure for any passenger injury, but it's also protection for both of us." After a moment's hesitation, Marcus nodded. Zara quickly photographed the injuries, noting the distinct splash pattern that clearly contradicted Richard's claim about being bumped. "You have a tournament in New York?" she asked, recalling the chess book. "National Youth Chess Championship," Marcus confirmed, brightening slightly despite his discomfort. "I got a scholarship." "That's impressive," Zara said, meaning it. "I played a little in high school, never got past sacrificing my queen too early, though." A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. "That's a common beginner mistake. The queen seems so powerful that losing her feels catastrophic, but sometimes the sacrifice opens up better strategic positions." "Smart thinking," Zara said, applying burn ointment from the first aid kit. "That applies to more than just chess, doesn't it?" As they returned to the cabin, Zara's expression shifted back to professional neutrality. Richard had spread his belongings across both seats, clearly expecting Marcus to find another place to sit. "Sir," Zara said firmly, "I need you to come with me to the galley." Richard looked up with mild annoyance. "What for?" "I've already explained." "What happened?" "The boy bumped me." "This isn't a request, sir," Zara replied, her voice low but resolute. "FAA regulations require documentation of all passenger injuries, and as the involved party, I need your statement." "I'm busy," Richard gestured dismissively at his laptop. "Send one of the other attendants if you need paperwork filled out." Zara leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice further. "Sir, I need to remind you that interfering with a flight crew member's duties is a federal offense under 49 U.S.C. Para 46504. Please come with me now." Something in her tone finally penetrated Richard's shield of entitlement. With visible reluctance, he followed her to the forward galley. Marcus slipped back into his seat, relieved to have temporary respite. In the galley's relative privacy, Zara turned to face Richard directly. Her professional facade remained, but her eyes had hardened. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to be perfectly clear. I observed you deliberately pour hot coffee on that child." Richard's expression shifted from surprise to indignation to calculation, all within seconds. "That's ridiculous. It was clearly an accident. The boy is clumsy and bumped into me. The burn pattern on his skin contradicts that claim," Zara stated calmly. "As does my direct observation. which will be included in my incident report. Richard's demeanor transformed instantly. His voice dropped to a condescending murmur. Look, Ms. Washington. He glanced at her name tag performatively. You're clearly overreacting to a minor incident. Accidents happen every day on flights. This wasn't an accident. And who do you think the airline will believe? Richard straightened, his tie, his confidence returning. A flight attendant making unfounded accusations, or a Platinum Club member who personally plays golf with 3 of your senior executives? When Zara didn't react, he pressed on. I don't think your supervisors would appreciate hearing how you've been harassing a valuable customer, especially given your background. Are you threatening me, Mr. Whitmore? Merely pointing out realities, he smiled thinly. We both know how these situations typically resolve. So why don't we just forget this unfortunate misunderstanding? I'll even request a different seat to accommodate the boy's apparent sensitivity. Zara maintained steady eye contact as she removed her documentation pad. I'm changing your seat. Assignment regardless, Mr. Whitmore, and I'm filing a complete incident report including photographs of the child's injuries and witness statements I'll be collecting. Richard's face darkened. You're making a serious mistake. Do you have any idea who I am? A passenger on my aircraft who assaulted a minor, Zara replied evenly. Your status with the airline doesn't exempt you from basic human decency or federal law. Richard leaned forward, dropping all pretense of civility. Listen carefully. I can have your job before this plane lands. One call, that's all it takes. Zara stepped closer, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear. Sir, I've survived worse than men like you. Have you ever witnessed someone stand their ground against intimidation tactics from someone in a position of power? Comment 1 if you admire Zara's courage in this moment. Like and subscribe if you believe in holding people accountable regardless of their status or connections. What happens when someone who's accustomed to getting away with everything meets someone who has nothing left to lose? As tensions escalate 30,000 feet above the ground, will the other passengers continue their complicit silence? Or will someone finally speak up for what's right? Seat 28F is available, Zara informed Richard, escorting him toward the back of the plane. His face flushed with barely contained rage as fellow passengers watched his relegation to economy. This is completely unacceptable, he hissed, loud, enough for those nearby to hear. I paid for premium seating. Atlantic Airways takes passenger safety seriously, Zara replied steadily. Your original seat assignment has been revoked due to a safety concern. Safety concern? Richard scoffed. Is that what we're calling it now? Everyone can see what's happening. She's playing the race card. His voice rose deliberately on the last sentence, ensuring maximum audience. A ripple of uncomfortable awareness spread through the cabin. Passengers who had been pretending not to notice now turned openly in their seats. Some appeared shocked by Richard's explicit accusation, while others nodded in apparent agreement. As Zara directed Richard to his new seat, an older white man, in an adjacent row, spoke up. This is ridiculous. You can't just move a paying customer because of some spilled coffee. It was an accident, added a middle-aged woman several rows ahead, despite being too far away to have witnessed anything. Kids are always jumping around. James, the junior flight attendant, approached Zara with obvious discomfort. Maybe we should reconsider this, he muttered. He's a Platinum member and it's creating a scene. An incident report has been filed, Zara responded calmly. The decision is final. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone in premium economy, shoulders hunched, as he became the unwilling center of a divided cabin's attention. He stared fixedly at his window, wishing he could disappear as whispered comments swirled around him. Poor kid, did you see his face? The man did it on purpose. I watched him tilt the cup. But why would an executive do something like that? To a child? The flight attendant is overreacting. Typical. The aircraft had transformed into a microcosm of society itself. Those who had witnessed injustice and remained silent. Those who spoke up belatedly. Those who defended the status quo regardless of evidence. And those who questioned the victim, rather than the perpetrator. The commotion drew First Officer Taylor from the cockpit. A tall man with salt and pepper hair, he surveyed the situation with practiced calm. "What's the situation?" he asked Zara discreetly. Before she could respond, Richard pushed past a flight attendant to approach. "Finally, someone reasonable," he declared, extending his hand. "Richard Whitmore, Pinnacle Financial. This woman has humiliated me in front of the entire cabin over a simple accident." Something flickered in Taylor's expression, recognition of the dynamic at play perhaps, but his professional demeanor remained intact. "I understand there was an incident involving a minor." "A misunderstanding," Richard insisted. "But rather than handling it discreetly, your flight attendant has created a spectacle and discriminated against me." Taylor turned to Zara. "Ms. Washington?" A passenger sustained first and possible second-degree burns after hot coffee was deliberately spilled on him, Zara stated. "I've documented the injuries and reassigned seating in accordance with safety protocols." The first officer nodded. "Then you followed proper procedure. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to have to ask you to take your assigned seat. If you have complaints about our crew's professional conduct, customer relations will be happy to address them after we land." Richard's confident smile faltered. He had clearly expected male solidarity, perhaps even racial solidarity from the white officer. "This is outrageous. I'll be speaking to your superiors." "That's your right, sir. For now, please return to your seat as instructed." As Richard reluctantly complied, Taylor quietly added to Zara, "Nice work. Let me know if you need anything else." The small victory provided temporary relief, but Zara noticed a passenger in row 10 surreptitiously recording the aftermath on their phone. Social media involvement would complicate matters exponentially. James approached Zara again as she checked on Marcus. "Beverly wants to talk to you," he said, referring to the lead flight attendant. "She thinks we should reconsider our approach here." "What approach would that be?" Zara asked. "Following protocol for passenger injury?" James lowered his voice. "Look, I get it. What he did wasn't right. But both sides share some blame here, and this is becoming a bigger deal than it needs to be. Maybe we should just let it go to avoid complications." Zara regarded him steadily. "A child was assaulted, James. That's not a both sides situation, and it's already a big deal. I've documented everything according to company policy and FAA regulations." "That's technically correct," James conceded, clearly uncomfortable with her unwillingness to compromise. "But sometimes technically correct isn't practically smart career-wise." "I appreciate your concern for my career," Zara replied, her tone making it clear she recognized his actual motivations. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on our injured passenger." As she turned away, she heard James mutter, "Your funeral." Perhaps it would be, professionally speaking. But as Zara approached Marcus with a fresh cold compress and additional burn ointment, she knew some principles transcended career preservation. The boy looked up at her with quiet gratitude that validated her decision, regardless of what consequences might await her after landing. The fasten seatbelt sign had been illuminated for 20 minutes due to moderate turbulence when a commotion erupted from the back of the plane. Zara turned to see Natasha Johnson moving purposefully up the aisle, her expression a storm gathering. "Force, ma'am, I need you to return to your seat." James intercepted her, placing his body directly in her path. "The seatbelt sign is on for your safety." "My son was injured," Natasha replied, her voice controlled but vibrating with intensity. "I need to see him now." "We're experiencing turbulence," James insisted, his hand rising in what appeared to be an attempt to physically block her progress. "Once the captain turns off the sign, don't touch me," Natasha stated, not loudly but with unmistakable authority. "Federal regulations permit passenger movement during emergencies, and my 11-year-old son's injury constitutes an emergency." James hesitated, caught between protocol and the increasingly apparent reality that he was facing someone who knew exactly what her rights were. Just 2 rows ahead, a white businessman had risen to use the lavatory without any intervention from the crew, a contrast not lost on nearby passengers. Zara, observing the escalating tension, moved swiftly to intervene. "Ms. Johnson," she addressed Natasha directly, "please follow me. Your son is in row 8. She turned to James with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll escort Ms. Johnson to ensure her safety during the turbulence." James stepped back reluctantly, clearly unhappy with Zara undermining his authority, but unwilling to create a further scene. As they moved forward, Natasha spoke quietly to Zara. "What happened? The call button has been disabled in my section, and no one would tell me anything except that there had been a minor incident. A male passenger deliberately poured hot coffee on Marcus," Zara replied frankly. "I've documented the injury and moved the passenger to another seat." Natasha's step faltered momentarily, shock and fury crossing her face before she regained her composure. "How badly is he hurt?" "First-degree burns primarily, possibly second-degree. On his neck, I've applied burn ointment and cold compresses." They reached row 8, where Marcus sat alone, a damp cloth pressed against his neck. His eyes widened at the sight of his mother. "Mom!" Relief flooded his face. Natasha immediately knelt in the aisle beside him, gently examining his injuries. Her lawyer's composure momentarily fractured as she took in the angry red marks on her son's skin. "Oh, Marcus. I'm okay," he assured her quickly. "Ms. Washington helped me." Natasha looked at the burns again, her expression hardening as she mentally cataloged each mark. She then turned to Zara, her demeanor shifting noticeably from concerned mother to something equally powerful but more calculating. "I want the passenger's name," she stated, "and I need the air marshal to document these injuries officially." "Of course," Zara agreed. "I've already filed an incident report with photographs." "Richard Whitmore," a voice suddenly supplied from across the aisle. An elderly woman peered over her reading glasses. "I heard him on his phone earlier. He's with Pinnacle Financial Group." Natasha went completely still. "Richard Whitmore from Pinnacle Financial?" she clarified, her voice taking on a new edge. The elderly woman nodded. "That's right. He made sure everyone knew it." A strange expression crossed Natasha's face, recognition, followed by something almost like grim satisfaction. "Ms. Washington, where is Mr. Whitmore seated now?" "Row 28F, Zara replied. "Do you know him?" "Not personally," Natasha said, her lawyer's mask fully in place now. "But my firm, Johnson, Rivera and Chen, successfully represented 6 plaintiffs against Pinnacle Financial Group last year in a racial discrimination lending case. I led the litigation team." Understanding dawned on Zara's face. This wasn't random. "Possibly not," Natasha agreed, her mind clearly racing, "which makes it premeditated assault with potential hate crime enhancements." From the back of the plane, Richard's voice suddenly carried forward as he complained loudly to a nearby passenger. His words cut off abruptly when he glimpsed Natasha standing in the aisle beside Marcus. Even from a distance, the flash of recognition and alarm on his face was unmistakable. "He knows exactly who we are," Natasha confirmed quietly. The depositions were contentious. He was forced to admit to discriminatory lending practices under oath. Marcus looked between them, comprehension dawning. That's why he was so angry from the beginning. It wasn't just about the seat. "No," Natasha agreed, squeezing his shoulder gently. "It wasn't just about the seat." She turned back to Zara. "I need to speak with the captain and air marshal immediately. This changes everything." As if confirming her assessment, Richard was now on his phone despite the clear prohibitions against cell usage during flight, his urgent whispers carrying an unmistakable note of panic. The coincidence of finding himself seated beside the son of the attorney who had humiliated him professionally had apparently triggered a vindictiveness that overrode both judgment and basic human decency. Now faced with the unforeseen consequence of Natasha's presence on the same flight, his calculated intimidation of a child had transformed into something with potentially serious legal repercussions, a reality that seemed to be dawning on him with increasing alarm. "I want to see all documentation you've gathered," Natasha told Zara, "and I need statements from any witnesses before we land." As they spoke, James approached again, his expression troubled. "The captain wants to know what's happening. There are complaints from several passengers about disruptions." "Excellent. Natasha replied before Zara could speak. Please inform the captain that there will be law enforcement officers meeting this flight due to an assault on a minor possible hate crime and what appears to be witness intimidation currently in progress. She gestured toward Richard, who was now moving through the cabin approaching passengers who had witnessed the incident, speaking intensely to each one. James blanched. I'll relay the message. As he hurried toward the cockpit, Natasha turned to Marcus. How are you really
feeling?
For the first time, the boy allowed his true distress to show. It hurts, Mom, and everyone was watching, but nobody said anything until Ms. Washington helped me. Natasha pulled him gently into her arms, mindful of his burns. I'm here now, she promised, and we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed from passive discomfort to charged anticipation. Word had spread rapidly about Richard's background and Natasha's identity, creating a narrative far more compelling than a simple coffee spill. Passengers, who had remained silent, now processed their complicity differently in light of new context. An elderly white woman with immaculately coiffed silver hair approached row 8, where Natasha was still seated beside Marcus. She pressed a business card into Zara's hand. Eleanor Blackwell, she introduced herself quietly. Retired federal judge, Second Circuit Court of Appeals. I witnessed the entire incident and would be willing to provide testimony. She glanced at Marcus with genuine concern. That was no accident, young man. I should have spoken up immediately, and I apologize for my hesitation. Natasha accepted the card with a grateful nod. Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Washington? A teenage girl with purple-tipped hair leaned across from row 7. I have a video. Not of the actual spill, but right after, when that guy was claiming Marcus bumped him. You can totally see it's a lie from how the coffee splashed. You recorded it? Zara asked, surprised. The girl nodded. I've been documenting microaggressions for my social studies project. I never expected to capture something this extreme. From across the aisle, an Asian man in a business suit who had earlier remained conspicuously silent now cleared his throat. Min Jun Park, Morgan Stanley. I saw everything. The man deliberately tilted his cup when the boy reached for his pencil. I should have said something immediately. His expression reflected genuine regret. I have a son about his age. I'd want someone to speak up for him. Beside him, his white colleague nodded. I'll corroborate that. It was 100% intentional. The growing coalition of witnesses seemed to embolden others. A flight attendant from another section approached with a paper cup. The passenger in 28F asked for a hot tea after being relocated. When I served him, he asked how much trouble an attendant would get into for fabricating incidents. It felt like he was fishing for information about your job security, she told Zara. I saved the cup with his fingerprints. James, who had earlier suggested letting it go, now approached with an affected look of concern. I've been thinking about the passenger's behavior during boarding, he announced loudly enough for several rows to hear. He seemed noticeably intoxicated. I probably should have alerted you earlier, Zara. Natasha and Zara exchanged knowing glances at this transparent attempt to position himself on the right side of a situation that had clearly shifted. Expedient allies were still allies, however, so Zara merely nodded. Please include that in your statement, James. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into New York. We are approximately 90 minutes from landing at JFK International. At this time, we ask that all passengers return to their assigned seats and fasten their seatbelts. The announcement triggered a flurry of activity as witnesses hurried to provide contact information and preliminary statements before returning to their seats. Richard, observing the growing coalition from the back, was now engaged in an intense phone conversation despite repeated reminders about electronic device restrictions. Need someone waiting at the gate, passengers nearby overheard him saying, urgently. Yes, the Johnson woman from the lending case. She's here with her kid. It's complicated. No, listen to me. This could get very bad very quickly. Call Davis in legal and have him. A flight attendant finally convinced him to end the call, but the damage was done. Richard was clearly mobilizing resources to counter the unexpected challenge to his authority and actions. Zara was called to the cockpit shortly afterward. The captain, a veteran pilot named Reynolds with 30 years of experience, looked troubled. "Washington, I just received a direct radio communication from Atlantic Airways' Chief of Operations," he informed her grimly. "Highly unusual procedure." "What did they want, sir?" "They've issued explicit instructions. No authorities are to be involved in what they're calling a customer service misunderstanding. Richard Whitmore is to be personally escorted to the VIP lounge upon landing." He hesitated. "And you're to report immediately to the station manager's office." Zara's expression remained neutral, though her stomach tightened. "I see. They specifically referenced your recent HR complaint," the captain added, watching her carefully. "Suggested this incident might be viewed as retaliatory on your part." "They're preemptively discrediting me," Zara stated flatly. "Appears that way." Reynolds sighed. "Look, I've documented your incident report according to protocol. Beyond that, my hands are tied. 29 years till retirement, mortgage, 2 kids in college." He let the implications hang in the air. "I understand, sir." As Zara returned to the cabin, she passed Richard, who now wore a smug expression of triumph. He'd obviously been informed of the company's intervention. The predictable corporate protection of wealth and status over justice was unfolding exactly as he'd anticipated. Back in row 8, Zara quickly relayed the development to Natasha. "Classic playbook," Natasha noted without surprise. "They'll isolate witnesses, offer incentives for silence, and control the narrative through their corporate channels." She thought for a moment. "We need to contact authorities directly, bypassing the airline entirely." "My phone will be confiscated the moment we land," Zara predicted. Eleanor Blackwell, the retired judge, leaned forward from her seat. "Use mine," she offered, passing her smartphone. "I still have contacts in the Eastern District, and unlike these corporate types, federal judges serve lifetime appointments. I'm not afraid of their pressure tactics." Natasha quickly composed messages to both TSA and Port Authority police, detailing the assault and the apparent corporate conspiracy to obstruct investigation. She included Marcus's photos and the teenager's video, which had been transferred to Judge Blackwell's phone. "Sent," she confirmed, returning the device. "Now we wait." As the aircraft began its final approach, the seatbelt signs illuminated. Through the windows, passengers could see multiple airport vehicles gathered near their assigned gate. Not standard protocol for a routine arrival. "Mom," Marcus whispered, noticing Natasha's tension. "What's going to happen?" She squeezed his hand gently. "Justice, I hope, but it might get complicated first." From her position near the galley, Zara observed the gathering forces through the cockpit window during landing. Atlantic Airways executives in dark suits stood alongside security personnel. Not law enforcement, but private airline security. Their positioning suggested not protection, but containment. Richard straightened his tie in preparation for disembarking, his earlier panic replaced by renewed confidence. The system designed to protect men like him was visibly mobilizing, right, on schedule. What none of them had accounted for, however, was the power of a single video already circulating beyond their control. A teenage girl's social justice project transforming into documented evidence of corporate corruption, shared with the simple hashtag #SaCoffee while flying while black. Have you ever witnessed how quickly allies appear when someone brave enough takes the first stand against injustice? Comment 1 if you believe in the power of collective action to overcome institutional barriers. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories of courage in the face of systemic oppression. What happens when corporate power collides with the unstoppable force of truth in the digital age? As our protagonists prepare to land, will the carefully orchestrated damage control succeed in silencing them, or will justice find a way despite the powerful forces aligned against it? The aircraft touched down at JFK with a gentle bump, taxiing toward Gate C-42 where the unusual welcoming party waited. Zara watched through the galley window as Atlantic Airways executives conferred with security personnel, their body language suggesting a well-coordinated operation about to unfold. "Ms. Washington?" The cabin interphone buzzed. "Captain Reynolds requests your presence in the cockpit immediately." In the confined space of the flight deck, Reynolds looked genuinely troubled. "They've escalated this to chairman level," he informed her quietly. The chief of operations personally radioed again during final approach with explicit instructions. "Let me guess," Zara said. "No authorities are to be involved." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Whitmore is to be personally escorted to the VIP lounge. Upon landing, you're to report directly to Station Manager Kellerman's office, and they're classifying this entire incident as a customer service misunderstanding to be handled internally." First Officer Taylor shook his head in disgust. "I've never seen anything like this. Direct chairman involvement over a passenger incident? Something's very wrong here." "Your HR complaint," Reynolds added reluctantly. "They mentioned it specifically. Suggested this incident might be viewed as retaliatory behavior following yesterday's filing." Zara absorbed this information with outward calm despite her racing heart. "They're building a narrative to discredit me before I can even file the assault report. I've uploaded your incident documentation to the secure server as required," Reynolds assured her. "Beyond that," he gestured helplessly. 29 years until retirement, 2 kids in college." "I understand," Zara replied without judgment. Self-preservation was a powerful instinct, one she'd navigated her entire career. "Thank you for following protocol with the report." As she returned to the cabin, she glimpsed Richard through the curtain divider. He was smoothing his hair and straightening his tie, his earlier panic replaced by smug satisfaction. When he caught her watching, he actually winked. The gesture confirmed her suspicions. Richard had connections at the highest levels of Atlantic Airways and had activated them the moment his actions threatened consequences. The system designed to protect powerful men was functioning exactly as intended. Making her way back to row 8, Zara quickly briefed Natasha on the situation. "They're waiting at the gate, not law enforcement, company security and executives. They'll try to separate us from the passengers and confiscate evidence." Natasha processed this with the calculated precision of an experienced litigator. Standard corporate containment: isolate, intimidate, incentivize silence. "What can we do?" Zara asked. "We've already done it," Natasha replied, referring to the messages sent through Judge Blackwell's phone. "Port Authority police operate independently from airline security. TSA has federal jurisdiction that supersedes corporate protocol." She checked her watch. "The question is whether they'll respond quickly enough." As the aircraft pulled into the gate, the flight attendants prepared for deplaning. James approached Zara with an apologetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Station Manager Kellerman is personally waiting to debrief you," he informed her with barely disguised satisfaction. "Beverly will handle the deplaning." The subtext was clear. Zara was being removed from standard procedures to prevent further documentation or witness interaction. As predicted, the corporate machinery was moving swiftly to contain potential damage. "Ms. Washington," Natasha called softly as Zara passed. "Whatever happens, you did the right thing." Zara nodded, drawing strength from the affirmation. "Stay together," she advised quietly. "Don't let them separate you from Marcus." As the cabin door opened, 2 men in Atlantic Airways management, uniforms immediately boarded, bypassing the usual deplaning sequence. One headed straight for Zara, while the other moved directly toward Richard. "Ms. Washington, I need you to come with me immediately," the first executive stated, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Mr. Kellerman is waiting." Simultaneously, the second man reached Richard. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Thomas Davis, Vice President of Customer Relations. On behalf of Atlantic Airways, please accept our sincere apologies for the unfortunate misunderstanding today. If you'll follow me, we've arranged private transportation to the VIP lounge, where we can address your concerns." The passengers watched this choreographed extraction with varying degrees of discomfort and outrage. The contrast was stark. Richard, receiving deferential treatment despite his actions, while Zara, who had followed protocol to protect a child, was being treated like a problem to be contained. "This is wrong," the teenage girl with purple-tipped hair declared loudly. "He poured coffee on a kid on purpose. I have it on video." "Young lady," Davis responded smoothly, "there's been a misunderstanding. Atlantic Airways takes all passenger concerns seriously and will be investigating thoroughly. Now if you'll please remain seated until general deplaning begins." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," insisted Minjun Park from his business class seat. "It was deliberate. Many of us witnessed it." A ripple of agreement moved through the cabin, but Davis maintained his professional smile. "We appreciate your concern, sir. If you'd like to provide a statement, customer relations representatives will be available in the terminal." As Zara was escorted off the aircraft through the forward door, she glimpsed Richard being ushered through the separate jetway typically reserved for first-class passengers. The system's efficiency at protecting its own was both impressive and nauseating. In the terminal, Zara found herself quickly guided through service corridors away from public areas. Her escort's grip on her elbow was professionally firm, but unmistakably coercive. They arrived at an unmarked office where station manager Kellerman waited, a thin file folder open on his desk. "Ms. Washington," he greeted her without warmth. "I'll need your phone and any personal devices immediately." "On what grounds?" Zara asked, though she'd anticipated this demand. "Company protocol for incident investigation," Kellerman replied smoothly. "Any documentation taken during your shift is company property." "I'm aware of company protocols," Zara countered. "They require chain of custody procedures for evidence collection, including proper receipts and witnesses." Kellerman's professional facade cracked slightly. "This isn't a negotiation. Your employment status is currently under review following yesterday's creative interpretation of company history in your HR filing. Your handling of today's customer service incident only adds to our concerns about your judgment." And there it was. The threat, barely veiled. Comply or face termination, with her discrimination complaint used as leverage against her. "I believe I'm entitled to union representation for this discussion," Zara stated calmly. "This isn't a disciplinary meeting," Kellerman countered. "Yet, it's an evidence collection procedural requirement." Outside, through the office's small window, Zara could see Richard being escorted to a waiting black SUV, bypassing the normal customs and immigration procedures. The choreography of privilege was proceeding exactly as planned, until it wasn't. A commotion erupted near the main terminal. Port Authority police officers had arrived, accompanied by TSA officials. Through the window, Zara watched their purposeful movement toward the gate area, badges displayed prominently. Kellerman's phone buzzed. His expression shifted from confidence to concern as he listened to the caller. "Who authorized?" he began, then fell silent. "Yes, sir. Understood." When he hung up, his gaze on Zara had transformed from dismissive to calculating. "It seems there's been a complication." Chaos erupted at Gate C-42 as multiple authority figures converged simultaneously. Atlantic Airways executives formed a protective barrier around Richard Whitmore, attempting to guide him toward the VIP exit before law enforcement could intercept them. Meanwhile, Natasha and Marcus found themselves detained by airline security under the pretense of collecting statements about an onboard disturbance. "We need to verify your identification before you can proceed to customs," an airline security officer informed Natasha, deliberately positioning himself to block her view of the approaching Port Authority police. "You have no authority to detain us," Natasha responded calmly, keeping Marcus firmly at her side. "We're proceeding to customs as required by federal law." "This is a routine security procedure," the officer insisted. "If you'll just come with me to our private office." Attempting to separate a minor from his legal guardian without court order or imminent danger constitutes unlawful detention, Natasha stated, raising her voice just enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. "I am refusing your request to enter a private location, and we will remain in this public space while complying with all lawful immigration and customs procedures." Her precise legal language gave the security officer pause, just long enough for a Port Authority police sergeant to approach. "Is there a problem here?" the sergeant inquired, assessing the tense standoff. Before the airline security officer could respond, Natasha addressed the sergeant directly. "Officer, I'm Natasha Johnson, attorney with Johnson, Rivera & Chen. My son was assaulted on this flight and we've been prevented from filing a police report by airline personnel who are currently attempting to escort the perpetrator off premises without proper immigration processing." The sergeant's demeanor shifted immediately from routine inquiry to focused concern. "We received multiple alerts about this situation, ma'am. TSA has been notified as well." Across the terminal, other passengers from the flight were being approached by Atlantic Airways representatives offering flight vouchers and upgrade certificates. The teenager with purple-tipped hair was listening skeptically to a customer relations officer explaining how the airline would thoroughly investigate if she would just sign a standard feedback form, which contained carefully worded non-disclosure language in its final paragraph. "I'm not signing anything," the girl declared, recognizing the tactic from her mother's experience with workplace harassment. "And I've already uploaded the video." Indeed, her clip showing the aftermath of the coffee incident, with Richard clearly lying about being bumped, had already been shared to multiple platforms with the hashtag #CoffeeWhileFlyingWhileBlack. The 16-second video was accumulating thousands of views per minute, outpacing the airline's containment efforts. Outside the terminal, several news vans had arrived, alerted by both the viral video and Judge Blackwell's connections with local media. The retired judge had made a single phone call to a former clerk who now worked as a legal correspondent for a major network. That was all it had taken to transform a contained corporate incident into a developing news story. In station manager Kellerman's office, Zara continued to refuse surrender of her phone despite escalating threats to her employment. When security personnel attempted to physically confiscate the device, she calmly informed them that removing her personal property without consent constituted theft. "You're making a serious mistake," Kellerman warned as his strategy crumbled. "Your career is over." "Perhaps," Zara acknowledged. "But some things matter more than careers." The office door opened abruptly as a TSA supervisor entered, accompanied by a Port Authority officer. "We need to speak with Flight Attendant Washington immediately regarding an in-flight assault report." Kellerman attempted to intercede. "This is an internal airline matter being handled through appropriate corporate channels. Assault allegations fall under federal jurisdiction when they occur in flight," the TSA supervisor stated flatly. "We'll need to interview Ms. Washington without delay." As Zara was escorted from the office, she glimpsed Richard through the terminal windows, being hurried toward a black SUV. Despite the executive's efforts to shield him from view, several news cameras captured his face clearly, his expression a mixture of entitlement and growing alarm as the carefully orchestrated extraction began unraveling. The situation reached its climax when airport police attempted to separate Marcus from Natasha for routine questioning about the incident. Standing in full view of gathering media, Natasha's response was measured but resolute. "My 11-year-old son is a victim who has sustained burns requiring medical attention," she announced, her lawyer's voice projecting clearly. "Any questioning will occur with his legal guardian present, with a victim's advocate, and after he receives proper medical care, as required by New York state law regarding minor victims." When the officer hesitated, she continued, "Additionally, as the assailant appears to be receiving preferential treatment and expedited departure from the terminal, I am formally requesting that law enforcement secure all relevant security footage immediately to prevent evidence tampering." Nearby passengers, many recording with their phones, erupted in supportive applause. The public spectacle had transformed the power dynamic completely, rendering corporate damage control tactics not just ineffective, but actively damaging to the airline's reputation. A medical team finally arrived to properly assess Marcus's burns. As they worked, Natasha maintained phone contact with her law partners, who were already filing emergency motions to preserve evidence and prevent witness intimidation. "Mom," Marcus whispered as a paramedic applied proper burn dressings. "Everyone's watching." "Let them," Natasha replied gently. "Sunshine is the best disinfectant, remember?" Marcus nodded, recognizing the legal principle she'd taught him. Wrongdoing thrives in darkness but rarely survives public scrutiny. Outside, Richard had nearly reached the SUV when two federal officers intercepted him. The executive's protests about valued customer privacy fell on deaf ears as the officers explained that all passengers were required to complete proper immigration procedures before leaving the terminal. As Richard was escorted back inside, his face now visible on multiple news broadcasts, the corporate protection that had seemed so certain began dissolving around him. The system designed to shield men like him from consequences had encountered something it couldn't easily neutralize. The unfiltered truth, documented and witnessed by dozens, spreading faster than any corporate communications team could contain. Zara Washington, finally released from airline custody after providing her statement to federal authorities, emerged from the terminal to find an impromptu media gathering. She declined all interview requests, stating only that she had followed standard safety protocols to protect a passenger in my care. As cameras followed her departure, Zara caught Natasha's eye across the terminal. They exchanged a brief nod of mutual respect. Two women who had independently chosen principle over expediency, despite knowing the likely professional cost. What neither fully appreciated yet was how their individual acts of integrity had converged to create something larger than themselves. A moment of public reckoning that would eventually extend far beyond one flight, one company, or one incident of bias. The days following the coffee incident, as media outlets had dubbed it, brought a coordinated campaign of institutional retaliation against Zara and the Johnsons. The systems designed to protect power rarely surrender without deploying their considerable resources. Zara received formal notice of administrative leave pending investigation from Atlantic Airways. The official reason cited was violation of customer privacy protocols and creation of an unsafe cabin environment. Bureaucratic language masking the true message: she had challenged the wrong person. Her personnel file, which she legally requested copies of immediately, had mysteriously acquired documentation of previous customer complaints that had never existed during her 12-year career. The fabricated history painted a picture of an employee with concerning patterns of confrontational behavior, rather than the stellar service record she had actually maintained. 3 days after the flight, Zara returned home to find her apartment, door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed except for her missing laptop and backup phone. The police officer who responded to her report seemed skeptical of the coincidental timing when she explained the circumstances, suggesting it was probably just random theft, despite no other valuables being taken. Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore's corporate machinery had activated fully. Pinnacle Financial Group issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern about how a valued executive has been unfairly vilified for an unfortunate accident. The statement suggested that current social tensions were being exploited by activist employees with personal agendas, a thinly veiled reference to Zara's discrimination complaint. Professional crisis management firms began working to reshape the narrative. Carefully placed stories appeared questioning the rush to judgment in our politically charged era, and suggesting that career-threatening accusations were being made before all facts were established. Most disturbing was the coordinated attack on Natasha and Marcus. Tabloid websites mysteriously received information about a 7-year-old misdemeanor charge from Natasha's college days, a protest-related offense that had been expunged from her record. Though legally irrelevant, the strategic leak created headlines questioning her credibility. More insidiously, anonymous educational experts began raising questions about Marcus's chess scholarship, suggesting that diversity priorities might have influenced selection criteria. The academic competition he had traveled to participate in suddenly faced intense scrutiny about its admission standards and evaluation metrics. Online threats began appearing on chess forums and social media platforms where Marcus participated, forcing him to withdraw from the competition for safety concerns. What should have been a triumphant moment in a gifted child's development had been poisoned by adult malice. "This is how the system works," Natasha explained to Marcus as they reviewed the latest developments in their hotel room, unable to return home while dealing with the aftermath. When traditional power is challenged, it responds by attacking credibility, changing narratives, and creating distractions. "It's not fair," Marcus observed, his young face showing the strain of unwanted public attention. "No, it's not," Natasha agreed. But it's predictable, and predictable means plannable. Indeed, Natasha had anticipated many of these tactics. Her law firm had immediately filed for emergency injunctions to preserve all evidence, including surveillance footage from the aircraft and terminal. They submitted formal complaints to regulatory agencies about Atlantic Airways' apparent obstruction and witness intimidation attempts. The settlement offers began arriving on day 5, substantial financial packages requiring absolute confidentiality and withdrawal of all complaints. The initial offer to Zara represented nearly 5 years' salary. The figure presented to Natasha was significantly higher, reflecting both punitive damage potential and Marcus's future medical needs for the burn treatment. "They're hoping to make this disappear," Zara observed during a careful meeting with Natasha at her attorney's office. They had begun taking security precautions after both experienced unexplained glitches with their phones and email accounts. "They always do," Natasha confirmed. "Money is how they measure the cost of continued discrimination. If the settlement is cheaper than changing their culture, the behavior continues." Rather than accept the increasingly generous offers, they continued investigating. Through professional contacts and careful research, they uncovered disturbing patterns. Richard Whitmore had similar incidents on other airlines, all quietly resolved through executive channels. Several female employees at Pinnacle Financial had filed complaints about his behavior, only to subsequently leave the company with generous severance packages and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Atlantic Airways itself had a troubling history of discrimination complaints from both employees and passengers, nearly all resolved through confidential settlements that prevented public pattern recognition. The system wasn't just protecting Richard Whitmore, it was protecting itself. The coordinated pressure continued mounting. Zara's union representative suggested that fighting the airline might not be worth the personal cost. Her apartment lease mysteriously came under review for occupancy regulation compliance. Her health insurance status was flagged for verification requirements. For Natasha, the pressure came through professional channels. Clients were quietly approached about concerns regarding potential conflicts of interest. Court dates for her other cases experienced unusual rescheduling complications. Colleagues received subtle suggestions that association with controversial matters might impact their advancement prospects. Throughout this institutional onslaught, an unexpected counterforce was developing. The teenage girl's video had sparked something beyond a viral moment. Other Atlantic Airways employees began anonymously sharing similar experiences of discrimination and corporate cover-ups. Passengers from different flights came forward with accounts of witnessing biased treatment that had been dismissed as misunderstandings. Judge Blackwell, immune to corporate pressure due to her lifetime appointment and retirement status, gave a measured interview discussing the legal principles at stake rather than specific allegations. Her gravitas lent legitimate weight to concerns about systemic issues within the airline industry. 2 weeks after the flight, as the corporate pressure campaign reached its peak intensity, Min-June Park made a decision. Despite potential business repercussions, the investment banker published a detailed first-person account of witnessing the incident on a major financial news site. His precise, unemotional description, from a business-class passenger's perspective, cut through the emotionally charged debate with devastating clarity. "What I observed was not a misunderstanding," he wrote. "It was a deliberate act followed by an equally deliberate corporate effort to obstruct accountability. As business professionals, we cannot claim to value integrity while remaining silent about its absence." The combined weight of these voices created something the system hadn't anticipated. A coalition too diverse to be easily discredited and too distributed to be silenced through conventional pressure tactics. "They're used to fighting individuals," Natasha explained to Marcus as they monitored developments. "A single employee, a single passenger, a single complaint. Those are manageable through institutional responses. But when patterns become visible and witnesses refuse to be isolated, the math changes." Indeed, by week 3, the narrative had shifted from a disputed incident on a single flight to questions about systemic problems within airline culture and corporate accountability structures. Congressional staffers began making inquiries about regulatory oversight and discrimination patterns in transportation. Industry analysts raised questions about Atlantic Airways' governance practices and risk management protocols. What had begun as an attempt to silence 3 individuals had inadvertently created something much more difficult to control: a legitimate public conversation about power, accountability, and the systems designed to protect certain people from the consequences of their actions at others' expense. 3 months after the coffee incident, a congressional hearing room buzzed with tense anticipation. The House Transportation Committee had convened special sessions on discrimination in commercial aviation, patterns, practices, and passenger rights. What had begun as a single incident had expanded into a comprehensive examination of industry-wide issues. Zara Washington sat at the witness table, poised and professional in a Navy suit rather than her Atlantic Airways uniform. Beside her, Natasha Johnson reviewed her prepared testimony while Marcus, now 12, organized his notes with the same focused concentration he applied to chess strategies. They represented just 3 voices among dozens scheduled to testify. Former Atlantic Airways employees had come forward with similar experiences of discrimination and corporate suppression. Passenger advocacy groups presented data showing disturbing patterns in how incidents were handled based on race, gender, and apparent socioeconomic status. Industry experts testified about the insular culture that enabled systematic cover-ups of behavioral problems among high-status passengers and executives. The incident on Flight 2143 was not isolated, Zara testified, her voice steady despite the bank of cameras recording her every word. It was merely visible. Most discriminatory incidents occur without witnesses willing or able to document them. Most employees who report such incidents face exactly what I experienced: systematic retaliation designed to discredit and silence. When questioned about losing her career of 12 years, Zara responded with unexpected optimism. "I haven't lost my career. I've redirected it toward its true purpose, ensuring safe and equitable treatment for all passengers and crew members." Indeed, rather than accepting Atlantic Airways' eventual reinstatement offer, which came with substantial back pay but required confidentiality, Zara had accepted a position heading a newly created passenger advocacy office within the Federal Aviation Administration. The role leveraged her frontline experience to develop more effective anti-discrimination protocols and reporting mechanisms. Natasha's testimony focused on the legal structures that enabled corporate concealment of discrimination patterns. The current system of confidential settlements and mandatory arbitration creates perfect conditions for continued misconduct, she explained. When each incident is treated as isolated and records remain sealed, patterns remain invisible to regulators and the public. Her law firm had established a dedicated transportation equity division, focusing specifically on discrimination cases previously considered too difficult to litigate successfully. Their first major victory had been compelling Atlantic Airways to release non-privileged data about passenger complaint outcomes, revealing stark disparities in resolution based on demographic factors. Most compelling was Marcus's testimony. Despite his youth, he spoke with clarity about both the incident itself and its aftermath. "When that coffee burned my skin, it hurt," he told the committee. "But when everyone pretended not to see what happened, that hurt more. It taught me something no 12-year-old should have to learn, that some people's comfort matters more than other people's pain." He described the online harassment that had forced him to withdraw from the chess championship and change schools. "I didn't just lose a tournament. I lost feeling safe in places where I belong." Richard Whitmore was notably absent from the hearings. Following multiple witness statements and the eventual release of cabin surveillance footage that conclusively disproved his version of events, he faced criminal charges for assault, filing false reports, and witness intimidation. Pinnacle Financial had placed him on indefinite leave before quietly accepting his resignation. The corporate shield that had protected him for decades had finally developed a crack through which accountability could penetrate. The hearings produced tangible outcomes. Atlantic Airways' CEO and several executives resigned following evidence that they had orchestrated the post-flight cover-up attempt. The airline adopted comprehensive new anti-discrimination policies, mandatory bias training, and transparent incident reporting procedures. Most significantly, the industry faced new regulatory requirements for documenting and addressing discrimination complaints without automatic confidentiality provisions. 6 months after the flight, Zara, Natasha, and Marcus gathered in Washington, D.C. for the signing of the Safe Skies for All Act, which established an independent review board for transportation discrimination incidents and whistleblower protections for employees who reported safety or civil rights violations. The legislation represented something rare in modern governance, a bipartisan acknowledgement that systems designed to protect power at the expense of individual dignity ultimately undermine the integrity of American institutions. While the political motivations varied across the ideological spectrum, the recognition of necessary change did not. After the formal signing ceremony, Marcus was invited to make brief remarks. Standing at the podium, taller now than he had been 6 months earlier but with the same thoughtful intensity, he looked out at the assembled officials, advocates, and media. "One cup of coffee revealed a broken system," he stated simply. "Imagine what else we'll fix once we truly see each other." The journey from row 8 of Flight 2143 to this moment had been neither easy nor without cost. Zara had surrendered. A career she loved but gained a platform to transform it. Natasha had faced professional intimidation but expanded her firm's impact. Marcus had lost a chess championship opportunity but gained a profound understanding of both injustice and the courage required to confront it. As they left the Capitol together, a reporter called out asking if they felt they had received justice. Zara considered the question carefully before answering. "Justice isn't something you receive," she replied. "It's something you build, decision by decision, stand by stand, day by day. We've laid a foundation. The building continues." Behind them, visible through the Capitol windows, flights continued crossing the Washington sky, their passengers and crews now operating under rules that acknowledged a simple truth: dignity isn't a privilege for some but a right for all, even at 30,000 feet. This story powerfully illustrates several profound truths about confronting injustice in today's world. First, courage is often not a grand gesture but a series of small decisions to stand firm when compromise seems easier. Zara, Natasha, and Marcus each faced moments where backing down offered immediate relief, yet chose the harder path of accountability. Second, systems designed to protect privilege rely primarily on isolation. By separating witnesses, individualizing complaints, and treating each incident as unique, powerful institutions prevent pattern recognition that might reveal systemic problems. The breakthrough came not from a single heroic stand, but from a coalition of diverse voices refusing to be silenced separately. Third, institutional change requires both pressure from outside and integrity from within. External advocacy created visibility, but internal allies who eventually spoke truth to power were equally essential for transformation. Fourth, justice isn't merely punitive, but constructive. The most meaningful outcome wasn't Richard's downfall, but the creation of new systems and protections ensuring others wouldn't face similar treatment. Finally, true accountability often costs something. Zara risked her career. Natasha faced professional intimidation, and Marcus lost opportunities. Yet each gained something more valuable: the knowledge that their actions created ripples extending far beyond one flight or one incident. As Martin Luther King Jr. wisely noted, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Sometimes that bending requires brave hands willing to apply steady pressure, despite the personal cost. What moment in your life tested your courage to stand up against injustice? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and chosen to speak up, or remain silent? We'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that examine the complex realities of discrimination and the courage required to combat it. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand firm in their own challenging situation. Remember that systemic change happens through collective action. Your voice matters more than you might realize. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply refuse to look away when others do. Thank you for watching, and may we all find the strength to be like Zara, Natasha, and Marcus when our own moments of truth arrive, choosing what's right over what's comfortable, even at 30,000 feet.